On today's show, the day of Mavs training camp starting. Have the Mavericks gotten better this offseason? What's their ceiling? We'll talk to Reggie Adetula about that and more on today's Locked On Mavs.
I'm Luka Doncic, and this is Locked On Mavericks podcast.
Mavericks, NBA champions. Bang! Bang! It's good! And the Mavericks have won the game!
If you don't believe, you shouldn't be here.
Loyalty never fades away.
Welcome. You are locked on to the Dallas Mavericks. My name is Nick Angstadt, media member and NBA channel manager for the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for being part of the show, making Locked On Mavs your first listen every day. Join the Raccoon Squad, be an everydayer, subscribe, follow for free. Just search Locked On Mavericks wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. The best way you can help us grow the show is to listen every day and comment anything below. Let us know in the comment section, what's the Mavs ceiling right now if the roster just stays the same? There's no more weird trade out there coming that Isaac thinks coming that I don't think is coming. It's just the roster is what it is right now. Today's episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50 plus infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. If you want to support our show, get text alerts, text us, ask questions, get text alerts on Mavs rumors, watch film with us, and more. Subscribe to our subtext. Click the link in the description or text the number that's floating by my face on the screen. Joining me from 105.3 The Fan, friend of the show, multiple-time guest. Oh, he's mellow and he's yellow. What you got for me, Reggie Adetula?
What it do, baby? Always good to be on with you and the Raccoon Squad. My man, Dallas, with the upside-down Dallas hat, Nick Angstadt.
Yep, we got that. We got the Raccoon Squad that people still.
Is that the regular? Is that the regular Dallas one, or is that the Wings one?
This is like the Mavs one.
Oh, okay, the Mavs one. Very good, excellent.
Yeah. Today we'll get into, did the Mavericks get better? I want to ask Reg about that. Did they get better defensively? What's the Mavs ceiling? We got a whole bunch of questions. Where do we stand on the centers? I kind of just want to look at a big picture about what this Mavericks team looks like, because we're going into the season. I will be at Mavs training camp today. I'm very excited to actually have a Mavs sanctioned event happen and to ask questions. Luka and Jason Kidd will be there. Subscribe to the subtext and I'll give you all the insight on what I'm seeing, hearing from people, and pictures and all that. So subscribe to that. So Reggie, I just want to start with this. From last season to now, are the Dallas Mavericks better? Did they get better over the offseason?
Absolutely. They absolutely got better. It was pretty masterful. What Nico Harrison was able to do to navigate the offseason, as far as, taking what a nebulous asset that maybe 10 pick that ultimately then came to you, turning that into 3 players, I believe, using that to then build out a full roster. It was pretty incredible what they were able to do to add some players and add rotation level pieces that, on any given team, that is going to be a starter / rotation player. Absolutely made this team better. Now, I think the better question is how much better, right? Because there's a level of expectation on these Mavs that is not simply hey, we just need you to get better this year. The expectation is much higher, and I think that's where it gets really interesting. But this team is absolutely a better basketball team. Yeah,
I did the thing the other day on Twitter where I went through and I said, okay, let me look at the most, the minutes per game, leaders from last year, and say, okay, who's their replacement now? So I took the end.
Okay.
After the Kyrie trade, the top players in minutes played: Reggie Bullock, Josh Green, Kyrie Irving, Luka, Tim Hardaway, Christian Wood, Dwight Powell, Jaden Hardy, Maxey, Justin Holiday, Frank Ntilikina, McKinley Wright. That's the top 12. The most minutes,
at least
after the Kyrie trade.
At least now you have some more players that the coach seems to actually like. How about that? They're better from that dimension as well.
I have to apologize that you felt that he should have played more.
You've got Grant Williams over Reggie Bullock, which I think is going to be an improvement. I think he's going to help in a couple ways. We talked about this yesterday on the show with Slightly Biased, but Grant Williams is going to be a defensive leader on the court, which I think is something they really needed. Where Reggie Bullock isn't necessarily that type of personality, Grant Williams is that personality, whether it's going to rub you the right way or not. He's going to come in and he's going to be the one barking on defense, and they needed a personality and a person like that. And hopefully he'll hit threes in October, November, and December, unlike Reggie Bullock would.
He doesn't need the ramp up period. Yeah, no, like a more consistent shooter, a dude who rightfully should be a like finals rotation type player.
He was,
even though for some reason Joe Mazzulla thought differently. But no, that absolutely that level caliber of player. And I think that obviously the biggest part of that is defensively. Like that is a dude who you have an assignment, you'll feel comfortable with him having that. And not to say that Reggie Bullock wasn't entirely that, but he was not entirely that.
Yeah, and I think his defense took a step back last season. He could still navigate screens really well. It just finishing plays and keeping up with it the entire play. I felt like he fell back last year. The 3-point shooting took a little bit longer than normal to finally get up to speed, and then I think eventually it was fine at the end of the year. So you've got Reggie Bullock and Grant Williams, and then everybody else is the same of the top 9, except for Christian Wood, which I think then turns into Richaun Holmes, Dereck Lively, and then probably some like Omax minutes as well, playing some 4 at that spot. And so at that position, you say, well, we lost all this scoring with Christian Wood, we lost some rebounding for sure. But if Richaun Holmes can be back to 2 years ago, Richaun Holmes, if Dereck Lively can contribute right away. And if you get anything from Omax and probably even Derrick Jones Jr., like you're replacing one guy with a couple different options. And if one of those hits, then I think you could upgrade at that spot too.
Yeah, no, and I think as you were mentioning it, because obviously you do the 1-for-1 comparison, you're like, oh no, this thing looks very similar. And I think that that's fair. I think when we start talking about fit, the way that pieces fit together is where this starts looking a lot more interesting, because there was a lot of times where you felt like you had Franken roster, right? Like you had kind of these things that didn't quite make sense on a basketball court. And I think that you're getting a little bit closer to that, I guess, best case scenario, because obviously now you're starting to do some projection forward of how much can Omax provide to you. What is this going to look like when you have certain players like Richaun Holmes playing at the 5 versus the 4, or even Dereck Lively? I think that there's a lot of projection in it, but in theory, this should fit together a lot better than what it seemed like. If for no reason, then again, to come back to this Christian Wood thing, not to harp on that man, but like the vibes have got to be a lot better, I imagine, than where it seemed like it started to get at the end of last year.
Well, and don't forget, I still haven't gotten rid of this drop, but I'm just going to keep it. Don't forget, JaVale's JaVale's gone too. So like, if those are the two guys that were bringing down the vibes last year because they weren't playing, didn't have a spot in the rotation, didn't know where they stood with the team, JaVale got signed and brought in to be a starter, and then he wasn't. Like, I don't think there was any bad vibes with JaVale, but I would understand if there were, because especially from his side. But yeah, you do have a better fit of, you know where guys are going to slot in. You can just see where their role would fit with Grant Williams, with Richaun Holmes. Maybe the rookies with Dereck Lively and Omax, but there's not many rookies that like bring bad vibes to a team, right? Like, because
you would hope not.
Especially these two guys that are just so mature, come in, say the right things and all that. Then, so I did the minutes thing, and then you look towards the end. The 10th, 11th, and 12th spots were Justin Holiday, Frank Ntilikina, and McKinley Wright. You replace those guys now with some combination of, some facsimile of Omax, Derrick Jones Jr., Seth Curry, and Dante Exum. I think that's an improvement on all three of those spots. Like, you have way more options and like probable replacements for all these. Your deep depth got so much better over the offseason.
Yeah, and the thing that I noticed when you mentioned those names, dudes that you can point to and say they do a thing, right? At least there is some, as opposed to just like basketball player at the end of a.
Wait,
Frank
doesn't do a thing?
Don't make me say bad things about that man. I don't want to do
People
that,
forget about Frank.
But like, obviously Dante Exum had like the defensive chops to play in this league. It was just like, can you play him with the offensive end? If the progress that we've seen, that was a weird way of saying that if the progress that we've seen overseas does translate back to the States, like that's a dude that you feel comfortable playing with, I think, a higher defensive upside than Frank Ntilikina. Seth Curry, do I have to explain, right? Like, go look at the 3-point numbers. There is
ask his brother
there. There you go, right? Like, I think that you can point to those guys and go, there is a thing that you have. And I think that that's definitely what you would like in the end of a rotation, or end of a bench rather, is dudes that if you're looking for something, like I need something, that they give you some level of speciality that they can bring to the court.
We both agree they got better, but did they get better defensively? That's the area of the Mavericks that desperately needed to get better. We'll talk about that with Reg and more coming up. But before we do, let me tell you about Jace Medical. Jace has this thing that I had never thought about or considered in my life before, and it's peace of mind when it comes to having an infection, having something happen, a medical emergency that you either can't get to a doctor, can't get the right prescriptions for you. They have them in the Jace case. Look at that. Just some medical ASMR here on the show. It comes with 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. All it takes to get a Jace case is to fill out a simple online form, and in some cases, you have to jump on a quick call with one of our board-certified physicians. I didn't have to do that on mine. I filled out the form, and it worked. But if you do have some pre-existing conditions or something like that, you know that you have ongoing care from our physicians on any treatment-related questions. It's doctor-recommended, doctor-created. Don't get caught unprepared when you're traveling, when you're at home, when the supply line breaks, something happens. You know that you have this in your back pocket. You have it in your medical cabinet or whatever you have, and you can take advantage of it. You can get $20 off these life-saving antibiotics today with Jace Medical by using the code LOCKEDON. That's all one word, all caps, locked on at checkout, jacemedical.com. That's Jace, Jase, medical.com. Go get yourself a Jace case today. See what else they provide at Jace. And don't get caught unprepared. Get a Jace case today.
I don't always tell you guys the truth.
Thanks, everybody, for hanging out with us on Locked On Mavs, being part of the show, part of the Raccoon Squad. Appreciate each and every one of you. Subscribe to our subtext to get updates on Mavs training camp, on the season starting. I know a lot of you were asking questions about the Casey Smith story. I'll talk to Tim Cato about that tomorrow, probably, and say he wrote the story and see what the vibes are on that. And then I'll be doing some film breakdowns. I'll do those all throughout the season, too. I'll just watch a quarter or I'll watch a part that you guys want me to watch, and then we'll play it back and I'll have the video for you. All right. Here with Reggie Adetula from 105.3 to talk about the Mavericks. We both agree we think they got better as a team from the end of last year to this year. Now you look at it, and I have the question, did the Mavericks get better defensively? Because that's the area of the floor that they just desperately needed to get better at.
That's a great question. I'm inclined to say yes, but again, this is like forecasting. They have, Grant Williams is one that I feel good about, like a dude that you can play obviously 4 or 5 and that can kind of anchor feels a little bit strong, but like that has that
lead,
anchoring
like,
mentality, lead mentality. Absolutely. I think that's a great way of talking about it, and that you need that somewhat. You need somebody that can kind of be a floor general of sorts that can kind of help bring guys together, and I imagine can get in the keisters of your stars and make sure that they are also putting the requisite amount of effort into defense. Don't laugh at me. You know what I mean.
How is it you that used the word keister and not me? Like how?
Because I got the desired result. You laughed, didn't you? It's what it's supposed to do. No, but like you do. I imagine that sometimes you need that guy who is going to establish the tenacity, establish the level. A la, obviously, Draymond Green is the first one that comes to mind. I even think someone like a annoyance like Pat Beverly, right? Like guys that can establish the tempo when it comes to like defensive intensity. And I imagine that he is that. But then the tough part about it is like without fully addressing your starting center role, and I understand that there's conversations around that as well. In the NFL or in the NBA, rather, as I'm starting to get into radio mode, in the NBA, it seems like defenses are still going to be anchored by that defensive center. And that is something that you look at and you don't really have, particularly when your point of attack defense is not going to be strong because you have at least 2 dudes for whom that is at least a net a 0 or even a negative in Kyrie and Luka. So having a back line of defense behind them is going to be important. So I think that's the poor part that remains to be seen is just how much better. I think they are better, but I can't rightfully say with a straight face that it's going to be a lot better.
I look at the team that went to the Western Conference Finals. That team prided itself on its defense, prided itself on the ability to get stops, to like their defense was really good, and then their offense just had to be just good enough for them to get there. And if you look at who's like been replaced, okay, Bullock and Dorian, you can replace them with Grant Williams and Josh Green, and maybe you can squint and feel good enough if those guys can step into those roles. Brunson and Dinwiddie are gone from that team. You replace them with Kyrie and whoever ends up filling the other guard spot. Is it Tim Hardaway? Is it Jaden Hardy? Is it Seth Curry? That's probably a wash overall. Maxey and Dwight are still there. And then it was Davis Bertans and Frank Ntilikina were the next 2 highest minutes getters in that playoff run. And you replaced them with an Omax, a Derrick Jones Jr., a Dante Exum. Like, I think that you have way more options on this team. And the only, and I read that group of who was in the playoff series, like in the playoff run, and like that doesn't seem like a good defensive group at all. With Luka, Brunson, Dinwiddie, Dwight Powell, like Davis Bertans. Like,
were you not amazed that it was happening in the moment? I was amazed that it was defensive in the moment.
And so that's why you look at it and say, maybe this is a scheme that Sean Sweeney, assistant coach, and he's the defensive like coordinator, for lack of a better term, for the Mavericks. Maybe this is a scheme that just works even if you don't have the best personnel, because they didn't have the best personnel on that team. And so, but what's the big difference between those two teams is what I look at is leadership. And I think that Grant Williams can come in and be that. Jason Kidd needs leaders on the court. I think he's going to lean into Kyrie this year as a leader. Now that he's been established on the team, Luka's got to step into that role definitely more. But on the defensive end, I think it's got to be Grant Williams and maybe Dereck Lively. Like, you saw him at Summer League, at least just calling out coverages and calling out backline stuff that they really desperately need. I think he can step into that role a little if he's going to get enough minutes. And it sounds like Jason Kidd wants to play him.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, talking on the floor, if you play basketball, is super important defensively. Another thing that I thought of, because leadership is a great point, are they going to be able to rebound the ball a little bit better? Because, I mean, defensively, you need to be able to end possessions, and you have some interesting, sizable options. I just don't know if that ultimately leads to better rebounding if you're still going to be in a place where Luka is having to be a sizable rebounder on your team. But if you can end some possessions with some rebounds, like how many times did we see second chance points allowed by this Dallas Mavericks team just because they couldn't close out a defensive possession? So if they can manage to get any level of better there, I think that also adds defensively.
That's a huge one. I think Richaun Holmes is a little bit better of a rebounder than Dwight Powell. You look at some of his defensive percentage, like rebounding percentage numbers. I went over that. I did an episode a month ago or so. You can go back and listen to that one if you want, about what Richaun Holmes can bring. Lively would definitely be a better rebounder. And honestly, I think those two reasons, the defensive intangibles, the defensive like tools, and the rebounding, is one of the reasons why Jason Kidd went on with Mark Stein the other day and was like, hey, I think that these guys are going to be part of the fabric of our team, and that we're really going to use them, and I'm going to give them a real chance to try and show me that they can maybe start, but even if not start, then play him and Omax, because Omax 6'8", big, long wingspan, like he'll probably help with rebounding too. The difference between playing a Josh Green and an Omax is size, right? One of the reasons why that Mavericks team was so good, and that team didn't even rebound well. You had, Dorian was a 6'8" wing, Luka 6'7", 6'8". You had Dinwiddie, of 6'6" guard. Like, you had some bigger guys on your wing and guard spots, and they just got so small last year with 2 6'5" guys in Reggie and Josh, and then a 6'2" in Kyrie, and then Luka, and then Dwight. And you're like, okay, what are we doing now?
Yep. And I mean, rebounding, going back to that Western Conference Finals team, they made that a team effort, right? Everybody kind of packed in the paint, and then they team rebounded. And so I also like to kind of wrap this thing back around to the start when we talked about vibes. I'm interested in seeing, in my thought process, rookies are usually a lot more likely to buy in, right? Obviously, you get a little older, maybe you have other motives and things that are, pulling your attention and so on and so forth. I feel like rookies are more likely to buy in on what's happening. And I imagine that's partially it. And you talk about, obviously, the size, the want to that those guys seem to play with when it comes to defensive rebound and things of that nature. I'm interested if that also helps fit into what this team wants to do schematically, where it's like, hey, man, even if you're not like individually rebound, incredible, if you rebound as a team, if you're in the right positions, can you improve that aspect of your team?
And that's what their defensive scheme relies upon, is communication, is buy-in. Everyone's got to buy in. And Luka was not bought in at all last year. Like, I think him and Jason Kidd looked at this team. I don't know who decided earlier in the season. That's maybe a whole other show we can do. Who decided earlier in the season that this team wasn't it? That they kind of, all right, I'm not going to buy in as much on this team, and I'm going to coast on defense. And Jason Kidd looked me in the eye and said,
I'm not playing. I'm watching, just like you guys.
And was like, all right, this is what this team is, what it is. And that the Mavericks defense isn't successful that way. You can't just not buy in. You have to, and that whole Western Conference Finals run team was so bought in. They had Brunson as a leader, Dorian as a leader, and Luka was bought in, and everybody was bought into that scheme, and it just worked really well. And I'm curious to see, like you said, how that buy-in comes, where the culture is. And I think with these two rookies and young guys, I think they're just built like they're built different, right? Like they're built as deep. They know they're coming in as deep as defenders.
Right.
They know they're coming in as we're the guys that are going to do the hard-nosed stuff. If we want to get any minutes at all, we have to rebound. We have to do this. We're not getting shots unless they're wide open shots from Luka and Kyrie, because we've got two of the best scorers on the planet on our team right now. And so I think they'll be better defensively because they just have to be. If they're going to win any games, they've got to be better than, like, I just looked it up. After the Kyrie trade, so February 5th and on, they were 25th in defense, which doesn't sound like the worst of the worst, but they allowed 119 points per 100 possessions. The only teams worse than them, the Wizards, the Kings, who were a good team, the Rockets, the Blazers, and the Pacers. So, like, literally tanking teams, and the Kings were the only teams worse than them defensively. It's just got to be better than that. Coming up, I want to talk about Jason Kidd's comments the other day about Dereck Lively, Omax, Josh Green. Where does it all fit? We'll talk about that with Reggie coming up. All right, Reggie, let's talk about what Jason Kidd said the other day. His comments about Dereck Lively, Omax, the two rookies, because we're looking at this camp, and I think we're going to learn a lot today at camp. And so if you're listening to this, I will have an episode pretty quickly after, or I'll have an episode sometime about camp. We're a daily Dallas Mavericks show. It'll
give yourself some wiggle room. That's right.
Yeah, you don't want to commit to something you can't give. Jason Kidd said, I look for the rookies to play a lot this season. They're part of our fabric. There would be a chance of one of them starting. He talked about how the center position is up for grabs. And then he talked about, he said, I've talked to the coaching staff and Nico about starting Lively with the big group. And the big group is Luka, Kyrie, and Grant Williams. Josh Green not mentioned with the big group. And so him and Omax, I guess, are going to fight it out for that other forward spot. What do you think about this position? And Jason Kidd just offering this up as, hey, these two rookies are going to get a chance to really make a name for themselves.
I want to put a lot of stock in this, but Jason Kidd has, how do I say this? He has established himself as a somewhat unreliable narrator.
Here I go. I got you.
I don't always tell you guys the truth.
Right. And I mean, it's early enough in that, like, even the best intentions can sometimes go awry or go elsewhere. So, but I mean, just taking it at face value, right? With that point aside, like, I'm interested in it because you look at the profiles of what they can do, and that's what this team under Jason Kidd, that's what they've wanted to do. So I understand why it's like, hey, we're going to give them opportunity if they display themselves to be ready enough to play in an NBA game from the start. We're going to give them the opportunity to play, because otherwise you would just be engaged in some level of, like, hazing. I don't know what the right word would be, but like, yeah, man, if they are capable of playing, those are the style of players that you need. And especially because, like, the time is ticking on this. We all understand, like, the inherent clock on trying to be competitive with this team. We don't have to rehash that. So the quicker that you can get players that fit what you're trying to do with the talents that they seem to have, the quicker that you do it. But of course, you have to leave the opportunity or the possibility that they are not ready. And then that's when you have a whole bunch of different options that you said, like you mentioned, they have a lot of options that fit in different ways that you can then go to. But I understand giving the young guys that you hand selected for particular profiles of player to possibly play on this team.
Jason Kidd is one of the little rascals. He's sitting on the stagecoach, and there's the donkey or a horse or whoever it was, and they dangle a carrot in front of him, and you just want them to chase the carrot. I feel like this is part of what he's doing with these guys. He wants them to buy in. I don't think he needs to do this if that's his only, like, reason for doing it. These guys are just, these two rookies specifically are just so mature. They come in, They know their role, they know what they do well. They, were incredible in the draft process. And it's one of the reasons why they picked these two guys, because they knew we're going to need some guys that can come in right away and help us right away and do something, bring some skill to the table right away. I do think he's telling the truth, though. I am maybe. Me and Cato and maybe McMahon are like the foremost Jason Kidd is lying to us people on in Mavs media. But
don't believe what he says.
I think he's telling the truth on this, that I think he's going to give him a chance. He said, and one, if not both games in Abu Dhabi to see how they handle the situation, meaning he's going to start probably one in one game and one in the other just to see how it is. And maybe he's using it as an excuse for, well, you can't win with players that are 24 and under in the NBA. Like, you just can't win with. That's what he did with, what Jaden Hardy or Josh Green or whoever we wanted to see play more. I also think he did a good job with both of those guys because he didn't push them too quickly before they were ready. And so I give him some credit on that.
Sure. And I mean, when it comes to preseason games, you're not playing for record. Might as well throw these guys out there and see. Like, that's what the preseason is for, is it not?
Playing for a lot in Spain, though. That one is
sure. No, but like, I mean, give these guys an opportunity, like kind of throw them in there. Especially from what you saw in the summer league, where there were some interesting things to be seen. Now, is it ultimately going to work out where they are the guys you need? I don't know. And then some of this is also kind of a move of desperation in some ways, right? Like if you had definitive pieces that you were like, we have a definitive starting setter, we have a definitive 3, right, wing player.
Yeah.
Then you're not in a place for this to even be open to interpretation. Those are openings that if you're going to slot in a more developed player or a veteran or whatever the word is, it's going to be one that you have some reservations on for one reason or another, whether it's size, offensive production, rebounding, like you're going to have some reservations. So the dudes that in theory would fit better if they are ready, see if they're ready. Like I think that feels very basic logic. Michael
Malone is not doing this with Aaron Gordon or with Michael Porter Jr. or KCP. He doesn't have to do that with them. Where Jason Kidd, it's now open, like you said, and these rookies just have skills that the other players on the roster don't. I want to ask you about Josh Green though, because he was not mentioned in that big group. He's not a guaranteed starter on this. Mm-hmm. I've been floating this that if somebody else takes this and steals it, I'm gonna go back to my episode like a week ago. I think there's a chance Jason Kidd didn't put Josh Green in quote unquote the big group as a starter because they're doing a contract negotiation with him right now.
Oh, okay. I like that theory. Also, can I take a step back? Are we certain when he says the big group that he means the starters? Because is it possible that he's just talking about like a big lineup for them?
Well, Kyrie was in it. Kyrie was in it, so maybe not. No, I think so. He said Dereck Lively, he's going to start with the big group and see how that goes.
Okay.
And so he mentioned Luka, Kyrie, and Grant Williams. To me, that's like he says the big group as like the starters, your A team.
Fair enough.
Like, that's varsity, and then like whoever's in I guess everybody else is in JV. And then Tim Hardaway's a sixth man is what that's the only role.
I think that'd be interesting I do think that's interesting as like a possible like, hey, we don't want to guarantee these things in words that can ultimately come back and harm us in a negotiation. Also, could this be a motivational tactic of some sort? He seems to like to do that with this talking into microphones, as you mentioned. So I don't know. I don't know what motivation Josh Green would seem to need. He seems to be a dude that's very workmanlike, but I don't know. Like, I'm not in that locker room. Maybe he has that read on that dude and knows that that's the button to push. I know that that's giving Jason Kidd a lot of credit in that place, but I honestly don't know any other reason why you would do that. Or maybe it's just like a mission, right? Sometimes we parse language so deeply, and sometimes it's just like, I forgot to mention that one guy.
He does that all the time, though. He's like, I shouldn't not mention somebody, but he was very specific about the big group and named Luka Kyrie. What do you think about Josh Green, though? Should he be the guaranteed starter? Like, is that a thing that we should be considering?
He is one of the players that's on this roster that you feel comfortable with his defense, but that's a dude who honestly is kind of more of a guard than he is a wing.
Yeah.
But like, again, necessity has dictated that people have slotted him in as your 3 because it's like, hey, you need a wing and you're familiar with him. You know what he gives you as opposed to like Omax or, Derrick Jones Jr. or something like that. Right. But, like I don't know that I'm certain that he is like a starter on a high level team, and that's something that he could easily prove me wrong with. But I don't know that I look at his game and I go definitely a starter. So I understand why like that's something that he would need to see, or definitely that I would need to see.
It's such an interesting type of player because the Australian national team coach thought for sure that he was a starter. He put him in starting with Giddey and Patty Mills and all them, and started him over Matisse Thybulle, who's a player that Mavericks were gonna bring in, and we thought for sure Thybulle would be a for sure starter on the Mavericks. And the Australian national team coach was like, no, even an injured Josh Green is better, and we're gonna start him. But I think he can rise and fall. He's a classic role player. He rises and falls with how good the players are around him. I think Luka and Kyrie will make him better than what Josh Giddey and Patty Mills did this summer. And I don't know, man.
Am I being unfair in just seeing a dude who has like, I mean, it's not like he's small, but like a dude with a certain size, and I'm like, yeah, I don't really know how great I feel about that being your wing, especially with the team that has some weird size situations.
But they want him to guard the point of attack because you don't want Luka or Kyrie doing that, and you've already got Luka at 6'8", so you've already got that size, so he can play the KCP type role where he defends point of attack and he can, just hit threes on the other end, and he can do a little bit more on offense. Like you said, he's got guard skills and is more of a guard in that way. But yeah, he is smaller than you'd want at that spot, which is maybe why he's floating out Omax, because Omax got that traditional big wing size.
Yeah, and I mean I think that's, again, going back, I feel like that's why those doors were left open. If you have an opportunity, it's one of the things that we see in the league right now where everybody's like, oh, small ball. No, you want skilled ball, right? Like if you can get the skills in a bigger size, you always want the bigger size. And so I wonder if that's the motivation there.
Reggie Adetula always supersizing wherever he goes. 105.3 The Fan. Go check him out. Follow him on Twitter and social media as well. And we'll be back with Mavs Media Day on Friday. Isaac and I will have a station to interview players. We'll also be covering all throughout training camp. Guys, thanks so much for listening to Locked On Mavs. Peace out. Boom.